But when I actually go through the answer of other people, other class,
Yep.
what I found is like basically this simple fact, same simple fact, but people have different emphasis on those same facts, and it leads to a totally opposite conclusion.
Yeah.
And that makes me wonder, well, it makes me realize the two mothers-in-law can never agree.
You are a wise man, Wilbur. But yeah, I think that you might be right there. But it also reminds you that we get the law that we get based from the common law, based on the decisions that the judges have had in front of them. So we end up with sometimes odd results because we don't get to choose what disputes get litigated. And in fact, it's only the disputes that get litigated. The contracts that work, everybody's happy, so we don't litigate them at all. And then, depending on what actually is disputed and litigated, then you've got all the vagaries of dealing with the courts as well. So what evidence gets admitted, what doesn't get admitted, how good your advocates are, how the judge was feeling on the day. Somebody told me not long ago, have any of you heard of the 5-2 diet, where you go 2 days a week with fasting? Michael Mosley's, it's been very popular. Well, apparently there was a county court judge who was doing it last year, and pretty much everybody on the commercial list was trying to work out what days he was fasting so that they wouldn't get they could delay their actions or anything before him, because he was just in a really bad mood every day. And like the idea of the law developing based on whether the judges have breakfast or not, it's quite scary in a whole heap of ways. So, yeah, everybody sees the world from their own point of view. And that's why I love the idea of this platform for you guys to get in and share your answers and talk to each other about it. And I'm rewarding, when I'm doing the marking, I'm looking also at the extent to which you've had a conversation with other people. That's part of the criteria. So going in early, even if you're going in early and your answer, at the end of the day, you'd end up changing your mind, that's fine. It's a discussion. It's not an essay. They're not supposed to be broadcast, if that makes sense. So.
Could I ask you a question, Kath? I know you're going out, so I won't take great deal of your time.
No, I'm still here for the duration if you need me.
I've submitted my, only because I got a busy weekend, so I submitted my assignment, I think, yesterday. I'm sure it's in the right box and everything. And I noticed a green light with 9% came up, and I'm sort of guessing that's Turnitin.
Yeah, it is.
I was going to push it through Turnitin before I submitted, but I'm not sure if you can do that.
Yeah, you actually submit, and then you can keep submitting over and over up until the final date. I think the very first time you go through, it gives you a response pretty quickly. And then I'm not sure, because this is my first time using the platform that you're working in, the Canvas platform. I'm not sure exactly how it will work in this, but under the other platform, sometimes if you submit it a second time, it would wait 24 hours before giving you the answer, the Turnitin score, which I think is a bit mean. With Turnitin, with that similarity score, there's a couple of things you probably need to realise. All of you are writing about the same thing, and it's pretty narrow. So the people who submit later will get higher similarity scores than the people who submit early, because you're talking about Dennis, just even the names of, Lorelei, the names of the characters will keep repeating. Carl Hill and Carbolic Smoke Ball has been cited before, so things like that get picked up. So reading a Turnitin report is a bit of an art rather than a science. You're getting a high number, it's a good idea to have a look at it and see what it's highlighted and think about whether or not you've, quoted properly, etc., and whether you've got the citations there. Turnitin's not very clever with AGLC. So, for example, technically AGLC, if you've got a long quote, so more than 3 lines, then you should have it in a separate paragraph indented and no quotation marks. So if you're using AGLC properly, Turnitin will pick that up as being a similarity. But I'm not a robot. I know I sound like a robot sometimes, but I'm not a robot. So I will know that that's actually a proper AGLC quote. From memory too, I think AGLC doesn't use double quotation marks even on short quotes. You're supposed to use singles, so sometimes it won't pick that up. So it's an art, not a science. I mention it because I've had students, particularly on their first assessment, get really stressed because they're getting quite high numbers and they've never had anything over 5% before. And yeah, it's actually different. It's a completely, you've got to think about it. So you know yourself whether you've copied somebody else or not.
So 9% in green would be pretty right, Kath, wouldn't it?
Well, I don't know until I look at it.
Right.
I don't know until I look at it. But
mine's 25%.
So, yeah, I've seen them anywhere between 0 and 40%, and it's still been all right. So particularly, why would it be so long? If as 40%, if you submit it at the end, you've got a really long bibliography with lots of references in it. That'll chug them away straight away. And I need to leave the bibliography in the checking, particularly with the second assignment, because people do a memo, then they've got their references, and then they've got the letter, and so it won't pick up things in the letter if, it's just a robot. So, yeah, I wouldn't worry about it. Okay. You know whether you've copy and pasted information from somewhere else, and if you've done that, you need to fix it. If you haven't done that and you've thought about it, you'll be fine. Wilbur, sorry, I interrupted.
Sorry, the similarity score, does it reflect just the similarity between the assignments, or it also reflects the referencing from external sources?
Everything. So basically all papers in its database, websites, it's whatever's in its database. So a lot of texts, I'm surprised, often it doesn't pick up things that come straight from the textbook, but because I'm familiar with the textbook, I recognise them and think, oh, that seems a bit familiar. Go and have a look in my textbook and see that it's there. Sometimes it doesn't pick up, particularly old judgments that aren't online, it doesn't pick those up. It just depends on what's in its index. It's just a tool. So it's just to help us pick up where there are plagiarism issues. And sadly, look, it happens a lot. People get stressed, actually. I think that usually, especially early on, it's just stressful and you're not confident about the way you write, and people go and Google law firm websites and they have a look, and then the next thing they know, they've reproduce something very similar to what's on a law firm blog, but it gets picked up pretty quickly, and you get better at it. For law students, it's really important to avoid that, because when it comes to admission time, if you're wanting to practice, you will need to tell the Legal Practice Board about any time that you've been subject to a disciplinary proceeding. Doesn't matter whether you win or not, but whether or not you've been subject to discipline, which interestingly enough includes, you need to reveal if you challenge one of your marks and it goes through the review process, that includes those sort of proceedings. Not that I'm stopping you from challenging. You just have to disclose it. You have to talk about it. Challenging just shows you're a fighter, but being accused of plagiarism and getting off on a technicality, they don't like that. So we try not to have the accusation.
Can I actually ask I do have two questions in terms of the referencing.
Sure.
For example, like if I'm not very good with the use of words, and I actually see, because these are, for example, the contract laws, it's a very common subject. Like many of the viewpoints or issues I had been discussed worldwide or in the law professions already.
Yep.
And do I need to paraphrase each time when I actually see a good argument, or I can take it out, but I just properly cite it?
You're going to find me annoying, but I am going to say it depends. If at the end of the day, using your own, we're looking for your own arguments or your own analysis. If your own analysis is based on things that you've read that third parties have provided, then you need to cite that. And the best way to do it is to summarise or paraphrase their arguments, cite who they are. Like in any kind of academic endeavour, you've got to think about the hierarchy of sources too. So information from a case beats information from an academic journal, and information from an academic journal beats a law firm blog, and a law firm blog beats something that somebody's put on Twitter. You know, you've got to sort of think about the hierarchy. But if at the end of the day you genuinely believe that the way somebody's put it, that's the best way it could be put, you would just do it a disservice to say it another way. Certainly quote it, cite it properly. But if you were to just have a piece that was, 50% laced together quotes from other people, then you would have difficulty. I would have difficulty being able to give you marks for your own analysis in that way, because you're, instead of analysing and synthesising, you're really curating an argument that's based on other people's materials. Does that make sense?
But what if I'm quoting the textbook, for example, an author is blah, 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 blah. Then in that case, they are the fundamental building blocks of the advanced legal argument.
It comes down to proportion. I mean, if you're look, this is a pretty simple exercise, the first one. It might not have felt simple, but it is a pretty simple exercise the first time round. And so you really are just citing the law and saying how it applies. And the fact that you're sort of starting off with the law, most people are going to put that in pretty similar ways. The way the textbook does it is good. It's actually your act of applying it that's your original piece. But later on, when it comes to writing argument essays or dealing with your own opinion or really solving something more complex, if there's too much just lacing comments together, it's going to be very hard for you to demonstrate the appropriate synthesis and analysis. And if you look at the criteria for the essays, you'll see how that pans out. So whilst you might end up with much better marks for the writing component of it than you feel you might get otherwise, it will be impossible to award you good marks for the synthesis, because too many of your words will be taken up with the opinions of others. Sorry, I'm looking for my water. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, to a large extent.
Yeah, look, it's daunting having to submit pieces, particularly if you're not working in your first language. One of the things I would mention, though, is if you look at the criteria for language, and quite frankly, if I had my way, it would be higher. The percentage for language or your writing is usually quite small in most marking criteria. And as I said, if I had my way, it would be higher, because I'm a practicing lawyer, and being able to write well that's part of the craft. We need lawyers to be able to write exceptionally well. And so when it's only a small proportion, it takes away from that. But you're not studying English, you're studying law. So that's the way that it is. But the other thing that happens when people don't write well, actually, and this happens more often for people who don't write well when English is their first language, that they don't structure it well. So, and so the arguments get lost along the way, or, you know, they introduce new things in the conclusion, or they have very long paragraphs where it's very hard to work out what the point is, or they don't use the words technically well. And so that makes it hard to find the things that we're looking for to give you marks for in the rest of the piece. Often my experience is with people who are challenged with their writing because English is not their first language. They're usually quite good at structuring and thinking about how the arguments fall. It's just grammar and punctuation, sometimes spelling even, can be not native and not perfect, but we get there. There are a lot of tools too. There's I actually find Grammarly quite good. If you've come across that, it's a free tool that you can put on your browser. I think you can pay some money to have it in Word, but you can basically just dump any text into it and it checks your spelling, grammar, punctuation for you. It tends to be a bit American, so you sort of got to watch out for, you know, it's putting Zs in where we would usually have S's. But other than that, I find it really good. It just points out the things you might have missed. And another thing that's often really good if you're worried about the way you presented it is, and this might sound a little bit silly, but to get a screen reader going on your computer or even on your phone, go for a walk and listen to what you've written. So get the robot voice to read it out to you. Because the thing about the robot voice on your phone or your computer is they're almost always she reads exactly what you've written. So reads it with that punctuation. Even if you've written a word that's the correct word, is a correct word, the wrong word in the sentence. So your brain fills that in when you're reading it. Or when, especially when you're missing words, you recognise that when you're listening. So it's often a good way to proofread it.
Just one other thing, Kath.
Yeah, sure.
I spend a couple of hours a day in the car, and I was just wondering, is it technically possible to sort of download the lectures or the tutes onto a CD and play them in the car? I'm wondering if any other students come to you with that issue. Or that,
I have had students ask me in the past for audio, and I'm happy to just send you straight audio if you want it. Most students seem to prefer to have the video, so sometimes people want it, I do both, it's easy enough. There are, I actually often, this again will sound crazy, I often prepare for lectures by listening to previous lectures that I've given. And I've just got them on my, they're on my phone, still on iTunes, on YouTube, and I'm just listening to that. And there are plenty of apps that will allow you to download a YouTube video and just have it on your phone. A lot of students do that, so I don't really know whether people are watching the movies or not. So, but if you want audio, I'm happy to put that up. I'll start doing that from this week if you like.
I like the video as well because you can see it and go through it. But I just thought in the car it would be helpful to me if I'm spending 2 hours in the car. I can run through.
Oh, absolutely. And again, that's one of the ways I use the car or walking my dog or train rides often to, particularly where the readings are in PDF form. I listen to them because, I'm sort of only half listening to them, I will admit, but it's a good way. And
if you listen often enough, you pick up little things sometimes you might not get.
Yeah, and actually Wilbur's just asked there, can I put the PowerPoint on Canvas? I thought I was. So
I think I only saw the week one though.
So, okay, I'll just double check. I've had problems with this before, thinking that stuff's there and it's not available to you. But what I'm doing when I upload, well, the consideration ones, I'm giving you lectures that I'd prepared earlier because I want to do activities in the classroom. I just really wanted people to have had an opportunity to go over the high level before we get there. Also, sorry, what was that?
The slides for the week for consideration.
The slides aren't there, or they are?
They are.
They are. I thought they were. So
where is it put in?
Let me see if I can have a look and find them. I feel like they should be pretty obvious, but I'm still learning this piece of technology. I said technology, didn't I? Just have a look. How about when we finish up here, I'll send you a link to them, Wilbur, because otherwise I'm going to be...
Oh, that would be great.
...mucking around.
Thank you.
It should be in there, though. Yeah. I must admit, if I had my way, I wouldn't give anybody slides ever, or not at least until after I did the class, because slides make us go in a straight line. And sometimes the conversations go in all sorts of different directions. And I can't know until we start having a conversation where you're going to want to spend your time, what bits make sense and what bits don't. And I'm a bit of a softie, I think. So over time, my slides have become more and more like study notes and less a guide for me to talk you through the cases. And so, I think we end up stuck. And I must admit, as a presenter, and I'm sure you were hearing this in the recordings, that when there are lots of words, I find I just get stuck. I just see the words and I start reading them out loud. I have to really work at not just reading the slides out loud. So I'll have a look at 2 and 3 for you, Wilbur, and I will share that as soon as I can. So from an actual problem-solving point of view, how are you feeling with, well, we've really covered agreement. We've started on the ideas of consideration. Are you feeling, I mean, it seems to me you guys are going great guns, but tell me where I can help you understand better.
I'm pretty comfortable with it, Kath. I just think that, it's an old saying, the mind's a bit like a parachute, won't work unless it's open. So when you read the problems, you've got to really have an open mind and try and be unbiased as much as you can. Yeah.
And I think that's, and it's fun. Remember, you'll have 10 of these over the course of, and my guess is probably not so many will do this week because they've got another assignment to do, and which matters more. And then the following week you'll have more people come in, and then we'll just keep adding on to it that way. So you got 10 opportunities. In fact, you'll see. I mean, I'm not being the world's toughest marker with them. Absolutely, like it should be quite possible to get 5 out of 5 regularly. 4s and 5s out of. Well, it's actually 4 or 5 out of each, so it's 25. So most people were getting in that range of 20 to 25 marks for the actual piece, and it's your best 5 scores at the end of the day. It's 5%. Lots of you will get a 4 or 5% out of that, which is much harder to get that 4 or 5% by getting a mark out of 20 for this assignment. So, and you're getting the practice for the exam. And you'll find as you go on, like the first few, it's pretty obvious what week we're in. So, yeah, this problem is probably about what we're going to study this week or next week. It's pretty easy. As we go further on, they'll get a little bit more complex and go back to stuff that you've been dealing with a little bit. But they're not super hard problems, and they're really similar to the sorts of problems you'll see in exams. Like some of them have taken straight from exams. And this time round, I've included amongst the discussion boards a couple of like short essay form discussion pieces, which are really similar to the critical analysis essays that you get in the exams, which often people find the hardest because that's the thing you have the least practice doing. So, yeah,
the format's great. I think the format's good.
You'll be fine. Yeah, it's good for you. Bloody hard work for me. I don't want to do it for the face-to-faces.
We should let you go out for dinner.
Well, only if you've got any more questions from you, Dee?
Not for me.
She wants to go to the gym and punch somebody. What about you, Wilbur? You've got another question, yeah?
I do have 3 questions.
3?
Okay. Okay. The first one, it's more on the administrative side.
Sure.
You mentioned that's like for the discussion, you're taking the best 5 out of the best 5 score out of all the discussions.
Yep.
So in terms of the first one, because it's weighted, it's assigned with like 25 marks.
Yep.
If you get that already, does that mean that you basically that is equivalent to the top 5 already?
No, because basically what it'll do is take your 5 marks, it'll take the best 5 and give a mark out of 125, and then that mark out of 125 will be the percentage. So if you do no more, you'll get 20. I don't remember what you get. Let's say, I'm sure you're a genius. You got 25 out of 25. So you got 25 out of 125 towards your 5%. And quite frankly, that's better than a slap in the belly with a wet fish, as Richard Stubbs used to say on the radio in the 80s. There are plenty of people. Last time around, some students did no discussion board pieces. They did 0. And they still did well. In fact, I had a distinction student who did 0. And why is that? Because think about it, I'm going to give you a percentage mark out of, I'm going to give you a mark out of 100 for your first, the assignment that's due in tomorrow night. That'll be translated into a mark out of 15 for the 15% for that assignment task. Quite frankly, you look at the criteria, it's the difference between a fail and a pass is like this. The difference between a pass and a credit is like this. The difference between a credit and a distinction is like this. And the difference between a distinction and a high distinction is like this. Like every mark after 50 is harder to get. So in a way, even if, a lot of people would only, they would not be getting those 5 marks anyway. So it does actually give you a bit of a marks advantage. But I think you guys, it's hard enough the way you study. I'm going to give you any advantage that I can because, at the end of the day, if I can do something that encourages you to learn in an environment that's quite difficult to learn in, doing it by yourself in front of a computer somewhere, then I'm more than happy to do that. But if you don't want to take it, you don't have to. It's not going to be a big deal. It's a minor advantage. And if you don't want to take it, that's fine.
Okay. So, no, it's not that I don't want to participate. I just want to understand how.
So other people can listen here too. I didn't mean you particularly. Yeah, you just want to understand.
My second question is, can you please elaborate the concept of option? When it constitutes an option?
Okay, so an option is an agreement to hold an offer open for a stipulated period. So the easiest example is an option for leased premises. So where somebody leases premises for a year at a rent of $100 and then has an option to continue the lease for another year, either at the same rent or new rent to be determined by a formula of some sort. So like $100 plus CPI. So when you think about it, the promise from the landlord to let the tenant renew the lease is basically an offer, or it's an agreement to hold an offer open for a new contract to be formed, because exercising the option is the acceptance of that offer. So what the law says is, in order for any promise to be binding, there needs to be agreement, offer, consideration, or otherwise a meeting of the minds, plus consideration, plus intention to enter into a legal relationship and certainty. So in order for an option to be binding, all those other things need to exist, because an option is just an offer by itself. So unless there is consideration for it, and more than that really, unless there's also an intention to be bound by it, and there is certainty as to its terms, it's just an offer. And so an offer can be withdrawn at any time. But if we have the consideration, the intention and the certainty, then it's a contract. And the contract itself is, I promise and I will be bound by my promise to hold the offer open. So it's a separate contract from the contract that's formed by its acceptance.
So an option contract needs to have all those elements.
That's right.
Including offer, acceptance, considerations, and certainty.
Yeah. So the option contract is the promise to hold an offer open, but that promise to hold the offer open has to be accepted. It has to be certain, it has to have consideration, and has to be intended to be binding.
The consideration needs to be there as well, right?
Yeah.
The consideration with reference to the options or with reference to the purchase contract?
The consideration with reference to the option. So if the purchase contract is, think about it, you can buy my horse for $100. I'll keep the offer open until Tuesday. In order for me to be held to that promise, you would need to accept that option. You would need to pay me some consideration for it. My consideration is agreeing not to go to withdraw the offer, agreeing not to sell it to somebody else. Now, the consideration might only be $1. It doesn't need to be anything. It could be a peppercorn, but you still need to give me consideration. And we need certainty as to the terms next Tuesday, what the price will be, what the process will be, and we need to demonstrate that we intended to be legally bound, which is not a high, well, we'll get to it later, but that's not a high bar for us to get over.
In your example just then,
yeah,
the option did specify the purchase price of the primary contract.
Yes, because we need the offer itself is encapsulated in the option. So we would want to specify what the terms of the subsequent contract would be if they're accepted, because otherwise we've got no certainty as to what I'm promising to hold open. Because we need to, the option itself is the offer. I'm promising to keep this offer available. So what's the offer? It has to be a real offer capable of acceptance on its terms. So we need to know what the price is. We need to know who the offer is made to. We need to know all of those other things to identify what an offer is.
So your comment just then, even the consideration, it's with respect to the option contract itself.
Yep.
But you still need to know the consideration for the subsequent contract,
because I need
for the certainty for both contracts.
All of these things, I know we're separating them out and talking about all these individual pieces, but they all interlink with each other. That's why we spend so much time talking about offer and acceptance, and we spend a lot of time talking about consideration, and then we'll talk a little bit about the other ones, because at the end of the day, they're all part of the same thing. We just need to be able to identify each of them separately, and they're interwoven in that way. Oh, Rosie, sorry about that.
Okay. One question I have is, for the case of PSB versus like boot, because like the pharmacist is only at the counter.
Oh, yeah.
So, and anything, well, the offer is not formed until at the cashier.
Yep.
When the payment is made and accepted by the pharmacist.
Yes, that's right. So that's the invitation to treat case.
That's basically the invitation to treat.
Yeah. So the putting of the goods on the shelves is an invitation to treat. The putting of the goods into your basket is just responding. There's no contractual relevance, legal relevance to that. When you get to the cashier, the customer makes an offer to buy those goods at the price that the invitation to treat has provided. And it's at that point that the pharmacist can reject the sale. They can say, no, Wilbur, you've got enough pseudoephedrine. We're not going to let you buy this much. They're saying no, and no contract's formed. But if they accept your offer, then a contract is formed at that point. And if you decide at the cashier or before going there that you're not going to buy those things, you've got no obligation. You can just leave.
So the extension to offer, the invitation to trade, it's the display sign as well, right?
Yeah.
For example, like.
Yeah, it could be. So a menu, like you go into a cafe and there's a blackboard with a list of items and prices. That's part of the invitation to treat. Or the display case with the muffins in it. So the word treat is an old-fashioned word which actually in this context means negotiate or to make an offer. So it's just inviting you to make an offer, inviting you to enter into negotiation. So in practice, though, we don't negotiate, we just buy things based on the price, because in practice, the store will just say no. And sometimes you don't even know. We were talking about this in class last week. You might go to a cafe and you just say, look, I'll have a coffee. And you don't know what the price is. And somebody comes back with the bill and, it's $78 for a cup of coffee. You might have an issue then. We'll talk about how to deal with that around topics 9, 10 and 11. But, sometimes we don't actually know all of the details. There's a little bit of a legal fallacy about these processes. You haven't looked at the menu, you haven't looked at the sign, you don't know.
Because this is actually a very important distinction between a offer versus an invitation to trade.
Yeah, it is.
Because in that scenario or in that case, the offerer the customer becomes the offerer.
Yes.
And the counter is the offeree.
Yes.
It's totally different from your traditional.
Well, it's legal logic. You'll get used to it, but it's I think we always think the person who is selling is the one who makes the offer. But actually that's why we don't need a seller and a buyer. We need an offeror and an acceptor. And actually in most commercial transactions, most retail transactions, the offer is made by the purchaser.
Oh, okay.
Almost always. I know it takes a little bit of getting your head around it, and then all of a sudden you'll see the world completely differently. One of the things that I suggested to the team or the face-to-face class last week, and I might make a little separate video about this anyway. We did a bit of an exercise, which it was not worth recording for you. It just would be too messy. You would be too bored. But one of the things that I think is a really good idea is to just, next time you go and buy something in a shop, afterwards go back and then do a timeline of all of the things that happened, and then identify on the timeline what were the legal steps, what happened at each part of the process. So in fact, actually, why don't we just quickly, I'll show you what I mean, but I would challenge you to do it yourself. I think I can share this. Can you see a whiteboard show up there? So if you walk into a shop at this point and you walk out at this point with a cup of coffee, a couple of things are going to happen. You know, you're going to see the menu at some point. You're going to talk to somebody at the cashier. Sorry, I'm just doing this. Then somebody's going to make the coffee, and then you're going to hand over some money. So just thinking at each point, sorry, let me just get a different colour. Okay, what's this? This is probably an invitation to treat. Telling the cashier what you want. What is that? Is that the offer? Could be. The cashier coming back to you and saying, we don't have strawberry muffins, we've only got chocolate chip. What do you want to do about that? Is that an offer, or is that part of the negotiation? And then when you hand the money over, is that when the contract's made? Again, I'm not going to give you the answer now, but just think about these simple transactions. Look, it doesn't matter. Nobody's ever going to sue, right, about whether a contract was formed in your local cafe or not. But it's a really interesting exercise to just walk past and think, what are each of these steps, particularly now that we're adding in this consideration element, makes it really quite challenging. And so I think
there's a term called request for information and supply of information.
Yeah. So that's at this stage. So that could be here, because you're using a request for information or a reply for information. So say you made an offer here for a coffee. I'll pick a different colour. So you make an offer here for a coffee and a strawberry muffin. And somebody comes back here and says, we don't have strawberry, we've only got chocolate. Do you want that? And you say, no, I only want strawberry. My guess is what will happen at that point is, in fact, you'll turn that into a new offer, which is for a coffee only. But this is not necessarily rejecting your offer. It's requesting you to advise whether you do a different deal or not. And you've said no. Well, in fact, it ends up being a third deal, doesn't it? Because, maybe, you know, they've got the strawberry muffin and they say, oh, do you want to try lemon instead? You say, no, I'll stick with the strawberry. I don't know. I'm making this up as I go along, as I do with most things. But thinking about where all of those things could fit in and why it matters, I think is really important. But I must admit, I am hearing murmuring behind me, and it's about 20 past. So if you guys don't mind, I would like to finish up now. Happy to continue the conversation if you need to or want to. And
I'm ready to get off, Kath.
We don't have to only talk at this time. It's just very convenient usually to get together and do it this way, and so much nicer, I think, to see each other. But do feel that you can follow up with these things as you go. But I'd be interested to see you guys have a go at that exercise.
Kath, can I actually just talk to you for 10 seconds, like offline? If that's okay.
Sure. Well, I'll finish the meeting now and I'll stop the recording, and the rest of you have a great time and we'll talk soon. There, little love heart to end your day.